Okay, well, it looks like it's leveling off a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Sawyer, the Superintendent of Schools here in the Shrewsbury Public Schools, and want to welcome you to tonight's virtual public forum regarding our elementary redistricting project. We are really excited about the fact that we are building a new elementary school, the new Beale School, which is on Lake Street off of Route 9, and very pleased to report that the construction project is going exceedingly well, under budget, on time. We're looking forward to opening that school next fall. And while it's obviously very complicated to open a new school or build a new school, maybe the most complicated piece that we have to tackle is redistricting our elementary attendance zones. This will be the first time that we're doing this in Shrewsbury since 1997, when Floral Street School opened. And so we've had a great deal of stability for a long period of time. But certainly the benefit of having a new school is not only replacing the aging current Beale School, but it's also going to provide adequate space at the elementary level where we've had years of overcrowding, and will open up space at all of our elementary schools for specialized programming in appropriate spaces such as art, music, English language learning, special education. So it's going to be something that benefits all the elementary schools in town. However, we are going to have to make some changes, of course, in order to achieve that, which will involve making the decisions as to which students will be zoned to attend the new Beale School, and which students may also shift other schools depending on how this all plays out. I just want to start this evening by thanking you for attending and by introducing the folks who are part of our panel tonight and attending. First off, I'd like to welcome our members of the school committee, Chair Sandy Fritz, Vice Chair John Wensky, and they are the two school committee representatives on the redistricting committee that was established by the school committee. And also in attendance this evening, our Secretary, Dr. Dale McGee, and members Lindsay Heffernan and Jason Palich. So we welcome them. I also want to welcome the other members of the redistricting team, the parent representatives for each of the different school attendance zones. For each of the schools, we have Christine Jasinski from Coolidge School, Tarek Andy from the Beale Early Childhood Center, Rajesh Velagapudi, who represents Floral Street School, and Shannon Creedon, who represents Patton School. We currently have a vacancy for the representative from Spring Street School, and I know Ms. Fritz and the school committee will be addressing that, or as the chair of the school committee, we'll be addressing that and finding a replacement shortly. We have two elementary principals who are representing their colleagues on this committee. That is Tiffany Ostrander from Coolidge School and Brian Mabey from Spring Street School. And then also joining us this evening are two experts from the GIS company that we have engaged as consultants to assist us with this complex project. And those are, let's see, on our screen here, Kate Hickey from AppGeo, as well as Priya Sankalia. So we welcome them, and they'll be sharing some information with you this evening. But I also will now turn it over to our other panelist, who is plays an incredibly important role in our school district and does it incredibly well. Longtime veteran assistant superintendent for finance and operations, Patrick Collins, who is a resident of Shrewsbury and a graduate of Shrewsbury High School. And also certainly not only for getting our schools back up and running during the pandemic, which has been incredibly complex, but certainly projects like this one as well. You should also know that Patrick is a former U.S. Marine officer who was a logistics officer. And so that experience has served us well for these kinds of projects. And he does an incredibly good job. And I couldn't be more confident in the leadership he's providing for this particular project. But at this time, I'll turn it over to Patrick, and he will begin to take us through what we're going to be doing this evening.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sawyer. And I'm going to share my screen, some PowerPoint slides here that help facilitate the presentation. And hopefully everybody can see those slides okay. If someone could confirm that, that'd be great.
Looks good.
Okay. And let me just advance through here. So As Dr. Sawyer mentioned, we've got a committee going here, and this evening we're going to provide an update to the community. We've done the introductions. I'm going to provide a little bit of background about the project. Mrs. Fritz is going to go through the school committee guiding principles that will really guide this work. And it's a very important aspect to decide upon before you get into kind of the details of the work. We're going to talk about kind of the redistricting process and demographic information that's being used. And both Priya and Kate will kind of go through some of the data elements and around student distribution and the timeline. And we'll have an opportunity here at the end for folks to submit questions in writing using your Zoom question feature. And we'll try to facilitate answers to those if they're general enough to feedback to the community. So we've gone through the introductions. And in terms of project background, I think it's important that just to step people through this and make sure that people all have kind of some baseline information is certainly this has been a multi-year project. In kind of this most recent version of the Beal project, although there was an application made back in 2013 and we were accepted into the Mass School Building Authority pipeline, the town deferred at that particular point and then picked it back up in 2016. And so we've been working in earnest on this project for more than 4 years now, if you can believe it. And that's how long these projects take. But the existing Beal Early Childhood Center, which was opened in 1922, is going to be replaced by a brand new 790-seat elementary school. And at the same time, we'll be reconfiguring all of our elementary schools into a different model. All elementary schools will officially be K-4 configuration. That decision was made by the school committee back in October of 2017. And so therefore, it will reduce the amount of transitions that students have by one, meaning that instead of going to Beal School and then the elementary school, students will now just be assigned to an elementary school for their K-4 education. So the other part of this is reducing our enrollment at our other existing elementary schools. Floral Street School has really been over capacity pretty much nearly since it was opened back in 1997. And we've been at kind of stressed capacity, if you will, at Spring Street, Patton, and Coolidge schools as well, with all of those schools having the addition of portable classrooms throughout the years. So those schools have been stressed, and part of the overall project here is to alleviate that overcrowding and make sure that we have that as part of the solution here. And that kind of feeds into this overall size of the 790-seat new Beal school. And then certainly we're going to be using, enrollment projections to help us navigate what might be the best plan going forward for creating new elementary zones. So again, kind of, why do we need this redistricting plan? Obviously, we've had, significant historical and projected enrollment growth. That was one of the bases of our rationale for getting the project approved by the Mass School Building Authority. And by the way, just as a reminder, if folks don't know, that project, the new construction, 54% of eligible costs are being reimbursed by the state. So they have a financial commitment of up to just about $34 million of that project cost. And so we're obviously leveraging those dollars to take advantage of this and provide space for the next generation or so of our students. Again, this project is going to alleviate the overcrowding at the other elementary schools and provide a so-called parity of space, meaning we want to make sure that when we open up the new Beal school, and that will have dedicated spaces for art and music and special education, that as a result of this redistricting process, that we plan for and create those same types of dedicated spaces in our existing elementary schools. So no more art on a cart, in the other elementary schools. They'll have dedicated spaces. We'll be, repurposing what are now classrooms into specialized spaces for those programs or specialized services. Another key, really important element of this project was to provide enough space for all students to have full-day kindergarten experience. Shrewsbury is one of only 24 Massachusetts school districts that don't yet still offer full-day kindergarten for all of their students. So we're in a very small minority of districts that don't do that. But when we open up the new Beale School, we'll be able to provide that. And the school committee has made a commitment to also eliminate the full-day kindergarten tuition fee. So it will be free full-day kindergarten for next fall when we open. As part of this project, we're also factoring in some new housing developments, and Priya and Kate will talk a little bit more specifically there about the Edgemere and the Pointed Hills Farm projects. And then, the other reason, of course, we need this project is we're building a new school. So that's kind of the rationale, if you will, around why we need to do redistricting. So in terms of where we are now and where we plan to be in the future, this slide is trying to, in kind of a very high level summarized fashion, depict on the left side what is a current configuration of our elementary schools. That's on the left side, and that what our target configuration would be into the future. And the target configuration isn't necessarily for next fall, but those enrollment figures, the total of 22,322 students is what's projected total K through 4 around the year 2025, like the fall of 2025. So we're not going to have those students all at once, of course, but we'll grow into that over time. So basically, you could see, for example, and I'm not going to read through all of these lines because you can kind of see it, and of course we'll post this presentation, but for example, Coolidge, Patton, and Spring, our target configuration is to have 3 sections each of kindergarten through grade 4. So a total of 15 core classrooms and a target enrollment of just over about 300. And on the left side, you can see where we're at right now, where we have over 400 students at Coolidge, 360 at Patton and 351 at Spring Street. And so you can see enrollment will drop at those schools and have about the same size, same number of classrooms into the future and 3 sections of each. Floral Street School, of course, is twice as big, and they currently have 32 classrooms. We would project that the target there is to have 30. So again, we're going to drop the enrollment, and we would have better class sizes and 6 sections of each of those K through 4 grade levels. And then the new Beale, of course, we have 13 classrooms right now at the old Beale School Early Childhood Center, and we're going to have 40 core classrooms and a design enrollment of 790 students. So again, that's kind of our, if you look at the target configuration, that is the kind of basis of work, if you will, around how we plan for going into the future, setting these new boundaries and, leaving some room for growth, if you will, along the way in those districts. Some, districts need to have more growth than others, depending if, they have one of those new proposed apartment complexes in their zone. But that's kind of where the basis of the work. You set your capacity, if you will, or your target enrollment, and then you kind of go through some of the detailed work to get there. And I'll leave that to AppGeo to talk about that. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Fritz to, again, talk about a very important element of this project before you even dive into the details, and that's the guiding principles. How do you make this type of decision? And so I'll turn it over to Mrs. Fritz at this point.
And thank you, Mr. Collins. And like he said, the guiding principles are kind of the four corners and what we're looking at to guide this process. We haven't done this in many years. The town is a lot bigger. We need to make sure we do it right. And we formed the redistricting committee, and we're providing them with these guiding principles that will make sure that as we move through this task, the needs of the community are met as well as the needs of the school district. So these guiding principles are in no particular order. They all are equally important. And the first thing we talked about was educational needs for all students need to be met and will be met regardless of what school that they attend. We also want to make sure that all schools have sufficient space for appropriate and dedicated instructional learning opportunities for all students, again, regardless of what school they're at. The other thing that we really felt was very important, it was part of the discussion when we were talking about building the school and putting the vote before the community, was having a real neighborhood school approach. So we want to make sure that we're looking at drawing attendance from boundaries kind of in that neighborhood school. We can look at walkability. We need to make sure we're being as efficient as possible with transportation. So again, that whole geographic piece around neighborhood schools is very, very important to this task. And we do want people to know that we are not having a school choice model or a lottery enrollment for this. I know some of the districts may have done that in their redistricting, but that is not part of how we are going to move forward in Shrewsbury. So again, neighborhood schools are very, very important to us. The next thing that we want to look at is very important as well to this group is student demographics need to be taken into account when we're redistricting each of the school attendance zones. We also, as Mr. Collins said, are looking at potential growth in our community. We know we have a few larger apartment complexes coming on board. We also want to make sure we're taking into consideration home turnover, where maybe a family who no longer have children in the district may sell a home and they have children coming into the district. So we want to make sure there's balance in each of our elementary schools for that additional growth as we move forward. And I think one of the most important things for families and students is we really want to minimize as much change as possible. We know this is not going to be an easy task. And for those families who may have to change a district, that is a very difficult thing for everybody to go through. So we want to make sure we're going to look at minimizing change as much as we can. And finally, we want to see if we can dovetail this with all of our other district initiatives. It's really important that we have a cohesive program as we move forward with all of our schools and all of our goals as a district. So before I turn it over to our AppGeo consultants, I'd like to see if Mr. Wensky has any further comments he'd like to add.
Yes, thanks, Mrs. Fritz. Good evening, everyone. Certainly some exciting times in our town with the building of the new Beale School. It's been great to watch the construction, certainly from Route 9. But I think from my perspective, redistricting is also our opportunity to right size our elementary school level. We know that we need the space. We know certainly that we need a new facility with a 98-year-old building. It needs to be replaced, but I think right sizing our elementary level benefits all schools. It's not just about building the new Beale School. It's about the impact to all of our elementary schools. And it's really been a rewarding experience for me to participate on this committee. We've got representation from all elementary schools. And it's also been great to work with AppGeo. It really brings some critical technology to the process, to a very complex process that I know, as Mr. Collins remembers, back in 1997. I'm speaking like I was part of it. I wasn't, but I certainly know enough about the process and how it's evolved and how critical AppGeo has been to this process. They've been a great partner. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Priya from AppGeo to continue the discussion.
Thank you, John, and good evening, everybody. I just wanted to give you a quick, if you could move to the next slide, give you a quick introduction to AppGeo. We are a geospatial IT firm based in Boston, and we've been in business for nearly 30 years. And we've over 45 people in the company, and we've been providing these geospatial solutions for local governments, for state governments, for private entities for a while now. And Kate and I have been working on school redistricting projects, especially in Massachusetts, for a while now. And We see ourselves as not just consultants, but parents of kids in Massachusetts schools, and we really understand the family perspective in this situation as well. We have worked with Newton, Lexington, Weymouth, Billerica, and most recently Wellesley as well. And each of those districts came with a different set of problems and different goals that they wanted to achieve. And we have tried our best to guide them through it and have been quite successful. I think with Lexington, in fact, we went back for a second phase of a project. So it is a challenge, and we take that up, and we hope that we can help Shrewsbury in the process as well. Next slide. So I just want to go over the redistricting analysis workflow to explain to you how the process works and how we go about doing the redistricting. We look at it as four basic steps. There is data gathering and analysis, which is the first step, which is very important to get as much data as possible and evaluate it. The second step is identifying these discrete, what we call components. They're basically areas which we would then use as scenario building blocks. And then we build these scenarios, and scenarios give you different views of how the enrollment districts would line up. And then finally, the fourth step is to, while we're building these scenarios, evaluate them against the guiding principles, which you just heard from Mrs. Frick. So it's these four steps together that that make the entire, the process work. And there's the fifth one, if you will, of the demographic perspective, which I'll bring in after I go through the details of these four steps. Next slide, Pat. So first, for the data gathering and analysis, the first step that we take is we get the student enrollment data from the school districts, and we geocode those students. So then we know where the students are located. And we look at additional background information and map all that. And we look at where the planned developments are, what the sale history of homes are using the assessor's data. We look at land use, we look at demographics, and I'll show you some of these maps at the end, but I just wanted to focus on these couple maps. This is just showing you the distribution of students in your current four school districts. Actually, if you could think of it as, there are all the old Beale students scattered all around town. And then on the left is a map of the new developments coming in, and also mapping any new constructions. So as we have this on a map, when we are building the scenarios, we can be conscious of what to expect and how many students to expect, and keep that in mind when we're building the scenarios. So that's really what guides us in a way. All the data and the entire process is very data driven, is what I want to emphasize. Next slide. So coming to components, these are what we call the scenario building blocks. These are, as you can see on the map, discrete areas in towns, or if you could call them neighborhoods or sections of town, which are delineated, and we, very careful when we build these or we create these components. And this is what we would then use, moving them around to create the different scenarios. As you can see on the map, they've all been, the names that have been given to them are based on the current district that they fall in, and then there's just a number after that. They are often associated with a neighborhood. So as you can see, we've marked, for example, the Edgemere neighborhood is Coolidge 9. So that's called Cool 9, oh sorry, Coolidge 8, Cool 8, and that's one discrete component. The next slide. These components were created in conjunction with the redistricting team. AppGeo took a first pass at it, making these components where we thought made sense. And then as we've been working with the committee, all the people on the committee are, live in Shrewsbury, have an intimate knowledge of the neighborhoods. So they were instrumental in creating them and telling us, where those lines make sense or where they don't make sense. So as you can see, we were paying close attention to neighborhoods and natural boundaries, any water bodies, any highways, and creating these discrete areas, based on that information and knowledge. As you can see on the map on the left, Coolidge 6, it creates the lines are drawn behind the parcel so that a street is both sides of the street would be in the same component, and we split it only if it makes sense to split it along a major road, not a neighborhood street. And as a result of this process, we've created about 46 of these components, which is giving us the flexibility then to create the components. To create the scenarios. Next slide. Then comes the scenario building process. We have started building them, sort of, initial steps at building the scenarios. So we don't have them yet to share with you, but this is an example from a few towns that we worked with. This is Wellesley and Billerica. So when we're building them, as you can see, the colors would show you what the new orientation of the new distribution of the districts would be. So initially it was all those components could have been different, and then we sort of moved them around to some extent, if you could think of it as a puzzle to make them work. But then along with that, all the data that is presented to the committee, it gives you the information that would be needed to use the guiding principles to evaluate them. So that's the key piece, is that you build these scenarios collaboratively, with the combination of components, and then we present it with the capacity information, the demographic information, the breakdown of grade levels. We can talk about demographics as far as in the case of Billerica, you see they wanted to know the capacity with modulars, the capacity without, where the low income student distribution was. So all of that information is presented when we build the scenarios. And next slide. And then sort of in tandem with the building process is also the evaluation process. And we use the guiding principles very closely and pay attention to them while identifying what the pros and cons of each scenario are. So, there are some scenarios where immediately that this just doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit so many of our criteria and the guiding principles. And we look at these scenarios to include changes by grade, and what is the walkability. So for example, on the left-hand side, for Wellesley, we created this polygon which talked about the distance from a particular school, how far it is for walking. What's the drivability? If there's a busing needed, how far would it be? And while we are doing this, we are keeping the neighborhoods together, really a strong emphasis on that, because we know that that's really important, and that's been important for all the schools that we've worked with. The neighborhood school concept in Massachusetts is really strong, and so keeping that in mind is really important. And while doing that, also keeping in mind the balancing of the enrollment. And that's all these things have to be evaluated while we are building the scenarios. So as you can see in this one, for Wellesley, we also did what are the residential properties within half a mile, and 2 miles from a school, and we gave them that data to look at as well, and then evaluated each scenario based on that. So there are many ways that we can look at the scenarios and use as much data as possible to give us the best outcome. Next slide. I don't have too many slides on this, but what I want to emphasize is also the demographic analysis in this project. What we'll be doing is we'll be using demographic projections with all the data that we have available. That could be historic enrollment data, and then our demographer, Bob Scarmadelia, will be using fertility and migration patterns to develop this cohort component model, and that's what he uses, this model, to then project out for 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years. And that gives us a sense of what the projections would be. And then whatever numbers he provides us with in the projection and the demographic analysis, we then apply those numbers to our scenarios. And that is what gives us a sense of, okay, this is what it's going to be in a projected scenario. So there are two pieces to the project. Is one, you create scenarios using current locations of students, and then the second piece is you project what the expected number of students would be in a component using that projection information. So that's the demographic analysis, which is another important piece in this entire project. Next slide. I'm just going to go through a few slides, which will, I'm sure, interest everybody. It is about student distribution, and I think it gives a good sense to the committee and to all of you about what the makeup of students in Shrewsbury is. So very basically, this gives you a sense of how many students are in each district. As we know, Floral has the most students, but this is just a general breakdown. Next slide. We also mapped the racial ethnic distribution of students in Shrewsbury. This is all information that is tracked when you enroll your student. So all this information is coming directly from the district. And as you can see, it is very, very diverse, and the diversity is really kind of spread out. We've done our best to group things that sort of made a little sense. Otherwise, we had the entire list of every designation, which was not really giving us much information. But this gives you the breakdown of each district as well, and how racially and ethnically diverse Shrewsbury is. Next slide. With income distribution, we were using the the free reduced lunch information that comes with enrollment, and we mapped that as well and broke that down by district so that we can get a sense of that while we are building our scenarios and trying to see whether we can keep that equity in mind as well when we're building the scenarios. Similarly with special ed, while special ed is offered, I believe, in every school, it's interesting to see what the distribution is for each school when you look at it geographically. And I think, finally, also the English language learner distribution. It's just good to have it mapped and get a visual look at it. Again, sort of spread out all over town. So those are all the slides about the process and the maps that we've produced so far. I'm just going to step through the timeline a little bit so that you know when to expect what's coming up next. So we've been through this whole data gathering and component building process from March through September. We continued it October through November, building, reviewing and revising scenarios as we go through, and also working on the demographic projections. Now we'll be incorporating these population projections, having the demographer present, having this public forum. So all of that is expected to happen December, January. We'll be presenting to the committee, getting feedback from the public, and also developing final scenarios in January with the expectation of presenting to the school committee for a final vote sometime around February 10th. And then, of course, March through June, a very important piece will be the planning for implementation and how does the school district communicate all of this to you, which will be very, very important piece as well. And I'm sure that the district has some really good plans with how to communicate this. As far as next steps, we will continue working with the committee and create the additional, all the scenarios that we're expecting to create. We will be having the demographer also provide a report and and talk about future enrollment. And then the next public forum, if you want to make a note of it, will be January 12th at 7 o'clock. It will also be a virtual forum. And we expect at that time to present some scenarios to the community and solicit community feedback at that time. More details about that will be coming soon, I'm sure, through the district. Questions?
Okay, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and just turn it back to Dr. Sawyer, Mrs. Fritz for any kind of wrap-up comments, and then see if we have questions from the community participants that would be appropriate to respond to generally here tonight. Dr. Sawyer.
Sure. Before I coordinate the Q&A, I'd see if Ms. Fritz or Mr. Wensky have any comments from the school committee members' perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. I just want to thank everybody who attended this evening. I know it seems like we were on a hiatus for a while and the whole COVID piece kind of took over. But this is such important work that we're doing going forward. We're going to be pushing information out to the school community. And I know as this information gets further out, we're going to have more questions, concerns. So we anticipate that going forward. I think that January 12th date is going to be very important for the redistricting committee to hear information from the community. So hopefully through PTOs and any other way, we're going to get that information out. But I want to thank everybody for attending this evening.
Yeah, same here. Appreciate everybody participating tonight. Looking forward to your questions, not only tonight, but throughout the process. I know as school committee members, it's very important to get your participation and your input on everything that you'll see through these forums. So thank you.
Thank you, Sandy and John. I want to thank Priya for the presentation and thank Priya and Kate from AppGeo. They have been an excellent partner to us, and to be able to utilize these maps with these components to sort of start to look at how we might piece together this puzzle of how we should redistrict our students has been very, very helpful. I also want to thank the parent representatives who are on the committee. They've asked excellent questions, made great suggestions. And they, along with Ms. Ostrander and Mr. Mabey, our principal representatives, are really putting a lot of thought and effort into this. And I think the community is being very well served. So at this point, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If any of our attendees would like to ask a question about the information that was presented or anything to do with the redistricting project, feel free to type a question in. We have a few that have already been typed in. And what I will do is just read off a summary of the question and then see if any of our experts here or any of our panelists would like to answer it or provide any information that would help everyone watching better understand where we're at. So I'll just take these going through in order right now. The first question is from a parent whose children attend Floral Street School. They're in the neighborhood behind the back path to Floral Street. They walk to school, and we're wanting to make sure that walkers are considered in a redistricting plan. That it's important. A lot of families who do walk to the neighborhood. So I know Priya mentioned this, but is there anyone who would like to just respond to how we're looking at that piece of the neighborhood school and walkability?
I think that is one of our main concerns that we're looking at is, again, neighborhood schools. Walkability is something that we've talked about at length during some of our meetings, and certainly something we want to make sure that we look at when we're looking at drawing lines for the districts. And I don't know if anybody else in the committee has a better response, but it's definitely something that we're looking at.
Thanks. I think, again, it's something that the school committee laid out as something we should be paying attention to as part of the guiding principles. And so that's certainly going to be considered thoughtfully. There were a couple questions from another parent who, again, focusing on the neighborhood school approach, was making some suggestions about possible ways for certain neighborhoods to potentially walk to the new Beale school, if there could be paths in between. I'll ask Mr. Collins to speak to that in a moment. And then there's also the idea of considering separating, using Route 9 as a separator for that same reason. Obviously, we're not going to have pedestrians crossing Route 9. But maybe, Patrick, if you could start us off by talking about any plans for any potential walking through walking paths to the new school, and then as far as Route 9 as a boundary?
Sure. I would just first reiterate that, we're not going to have an expectation of, that students would be walking across Route 9. And, certainly our history as a district is to provide busing for those students whom we're required to provide it for, and then also optionally for a fee for those parents who may not be, students may not be eligible, so to speak, per the state regulations, but if they wanted to pay a fee, then we've provided transportation for all of those students as well. In terms of walking routes to the New Beale School, I think some folks will, if they're familiar with, where the school is being situated on Lake Street, which is the former Glavin property, that roadway has been realigned and widened as part of this project. That was one of the first orders of business, so as to make it a safer road to drive and navigate. There was previously a pre-existing sidewalk from Route 9 up to the Glavin property. And now with this project, that sidewalk is being extended to the front, if you will, or the west side of Lake Street to continue on down in past what are the Shrewsbury soccer fields and all the way up to Highland Drive. So again, if you're driving down that street at all recently, you might have noticed that the telephone poles have been recently moved as part of that building of the sidewalk, and the sidewalk should be, you should see those being constructed fairly soon. So, students who live in the Highland Drive, some Howe Avenue, Roman Drive neighborhoods could certainly use that as a walking path. The further down Lake Street, of course, is a narrow roadway, and we wouldn't be expecting children, that parents would want their children walking down that street. But just in terms of what's already built into the project is that an extension of the sidewalk down to Highland Drive to capture more of those students there.
Thanks, Mr. Collins. And I think, some people have just suggested different elements of like where you might be able to place a certain walking path. And of course, the town is restricted by ownership of property in different situations as well. But where it's possible in the past, we've had walking paths, certainly behind Floral Street. Spring Street has a couple of walking paths. There's a path that kind of goes from a neighborhood to a municipal field on the other side of Patton. So if there's opportunities to do that where it's feasible, we certainly will, because we do want to promote walkability for sure. As far as the question about Route 9 being a separator, I think is just to reiterate, it may not work out as neatly when it comes down to the numbers that redistricting zones are going to be all on one side of Route 9 or another. Currently, certainly with Floral Street, we have students on both sides of Route 9. That's the current case for Coolidge as well. And whether or not, depending on the recommendations that are ultimately made by the redistricting committee, it's very likely that we'll see some attendance zones for schools that are on both sides of Route 9, where some of those neighborhoods would have to be bused. That just is likely going to be a reality just based on the numbers. But it is a key line of demarcation that we're looking at, obviously, as we try to balance all these different priorities. Okay, we had a nice compliment about the informative presentation, and thank you, Priya, for that. There's a question from a parent about how this will impact the middle and high school capacities in the future. And I can just answer that by saying it really doesn't have an impact on their capacities, because there is not going to be a change in grade configuration in terms of subtracting any grades from the middle school level. The intent is to maintain our current configuration where middle school begins in 5th grade at Sherwood Middle School. It's a 5th and 6th grade middle school. On the same campus, Oak Middle School is our 7th and 8th grade middle school, and then Shrewsbury High School being for grades 9 through 12. So this reconfiguration of the elementary zones really won't have any impact on our middle and high school capacities. And another question we have, it's a really important one. The question is, what if my student has one more year at a school and we've been relocated to another school? Can I opt out of the move and request to stay? If you, when we sent out the reminder for tonight and the invitations that went out in the principal's newsletters earlier about this evening's forum, there was a link to the webpage on our website. And if you go into the school committee section of the Shrewsbury Public Schools website, you will find it, a website devoted to the redistricting project. And I would encourage you on that. There's a summary of the school committee's guiding principles, and Ms. Fritz went over those earlier in this presentation, but there's a link to the full document the school committee voted upon. And I will read that part that specifically speaks to this. Under the guiding principle that changes in school assignments should be minimized for existing students to the greatest extent possible. And that's key because obviously we are going to have a lot of existing families who are going to have to change their assignment. But under that category, and I'll just quote from the document, it says, however, we want to avoid that where other priorities can be achieved. However, grandfathering some students by allowing them to finish their elementary school experience at their current school when their address is being assigned to a different school zone will not be part of any redistricting plan due to the logistical issues that would make other principles difficult or impossible to achieve. And I think a simple way of saying that is that in order to make this all work, we are not going to be allowing students to stay in their existing zone rather than move to another school, because essentially that would then take up seats that otherwise would be assigned to new students in that zone. And ultimately, just given the amount of space we need to reclaim in our student population, we just don't see it as logistically feasible to allow that to happen. We certainly recognize that that's not a desirable situation to have a one-year transition where you might have attended one elementary school through third grade, attend fourth grade someplace else, and then move to fifth grade at Sherwood, which is why we'll try to minimize change for existing students to the extent we can. I can tell you from experience, I was not part of the redistricting planning in 1996 and 97, but I actually was hired to start here in Shrewsbury in 1997 as the assistant principal when the Floral Street School opened that year. And there were families who had been districted to Floral Street whose students were only going to attend there for 1 year. And I remember at the start of the school year, those families expressing concern. But I can tell you that students are incredibly resilient. And ultimately, I think the feedback at the end of that school year was that the school did a lot of work to make sure that those students felt welcome and they had a good fourth grade, or in that case, it was a fifth grade year before moving on to middle school. And that's something that, some students are going to experience that, but we'll do everything in our power to make sure that that's a good transition. But it's a really important question. We'll make sure that that's clearly communicated as we work through this process. Okay. Another question here, it says that asking if a student was redistricted to Beale, which would be the new Beale, and they live less than 2 miles from the school, but were required to cross Route 9, they would be eligible, would they be eligible for a free bus, or would the parents have to pay? And therefore, maybe Mr. Collins, if you could respond to what the rules are about bus fees relative to mileage versus whether or not they might have to cross a dangerous intersection.
Sure. So, basically, and this is not, charging a fee for student transportation, I know is a weighted decision that the school committee has made on an annual basis for probably the last, I'd say, close to 15 years or so. And it's not something that they do or we do willingly. But in order to provide some sensibility and fairness and equity, if you will, around that process, the basis of the decision-making process is predicated upon the state law. And the Massachusetts general law basically says that public school districts are required to provide school transportation only to students in grades kindergarten through grade 6 who live 2 or more miles from their school. And interestingly, there's no requirement actually to transport students in grades 7 through 12. And there's no requirement to transport students in students in grades K through 6 who live less than 2 miles. There's just no legal requirement. And so as a matter of simplicity in terms of communicating this to parents and having a system where everybody can understand it and have a sense of equity, it does not factor in whether or not streets, public roadways have sidewalks, or there's busy intersections to cross or crosswalks. It's just, it would be far too complicated for any school district to try to navigate their way through that. So our busing system is, again, if you live less than 2 miles in grades K through 6, we have a tradition of busing those students, and parents have to pay regardless of road conditions. And we do have a fair number of students who decide to transport their own child or carpool, as parents know. And then some are unable to do that for other family logistical reasons and rely on the transportation. So that's just kind of a long answer to the question, but none of those factors in which somebody would have to so-called judge the safety of any particular roadway are factored into the state law.
Thanks very much, Mr. Collins. Certainly someone who put in a comment that didn't need to be addressed, but the idea of like other options for walkability in town, whether those are pedestrian bridges. I know maybe this is a good opportunity. Mr. Wensky could comment. I know he's done a little bit of work recently with there's some state initiatives around trying to increase walkers to school. We had a pilot program last year at Patton Elementary. And maybe, John, if you can just give a little bit of background on that project. And that's something that as we go into this new redistricting, something we might want to consider ways we can continue to try to build a more walker-friendly community.
Yeah, so I actually saw the comment specific to Safe Routes to Schools, which is a Massachusetts state-funded program. We've partnered between local town officials and the state program to optimize the bike paths and the walking paths to and from school, to just have them assessed and understand where we might need to have additional signage placed just to preserve and protect, the safety of our kids that are actually biking or walking to school. So that process is underway. It's in progress and something that I've participated in the last couple of years. So.
Thank you. And I think another question that came in about increasing walkability. So, and I know certainly Kristen Loss, who's the assistant town manager and planner for the town, and her team and the work that have been done on a master plan for the town continues to look at ways to increase walkability. Obviously, things like sidewalks. There's financial implications for any of these things, and we are a town that has a very limited and low tax rate, and which means that the overall town budget is not as robust as some other communities, perhaps. And I know the town makes the best use it can of different state funding for road improvements and so on. But this is something over time that I think is collectively as a community we're continuing to look at. And when you build a new elementary school, it's a good time to be able to consider ways to increase walkability. And the redistricting project will hopefully help us do that as well. There's a question here for Priya, wanting to know, based on the phases, the 1 through 4 phases, where we currently are in the project, and talking about hearing that demographics have been considered, and where we are finishing this into the relationship to the final presentation to the school committee, and so maybe just another sense for people where we are in the timeline for the process.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sawyer. We are, I would say, pretty much sort of in 3 and 4. So we finished building the components or creating the components, and the committee has already started building scenarios. We are still evaluating them. So it is a iterative process. So we've done a few and we are looking at them, and then we've gone back to the drawing board and created a few more. So till we are comfortable with them and have evaluated them enough to then present them to the community, that's where we are at this point. And yes, as far as the demographics is concerned, that is ongoing. So it is happening in conjunction, and our demographer has been working on it, has the model ready. has started running some initial projection numbers, which we're looking at, and we'll be incorporating in the next round of scenario building.
Thank you, Priya. And so at this point, I think that it looks like all the open questions, I think we've responded to in one way or another, although maybe a couple more will be coming in. But while we're looking for a couple more questions before we wrap up, I'm wondering if any of the committee members, our parent representatives or our elementary principals, want to share anything about, based on their experience with the process so far. You know, one of the things that was certainly important to the school committee and establishing this committee was to make sure that there were a strong amount of parent voice on this, representing the various elementary districts. And so just before we wrap up, I'd like to make sure that these committee members have a chance, if they want to add anything that might help parents who are, or educators who are watching the forum, sort of how we're going through this process and maybe what you've noted from your perspective coming to this.
Okay. Go ahead, Raj. And just a quick comment. This is my first time attending the redistricting. I think this is very, very structured, very well defined by the school committee. The directions on what's important for the schools and the families within the school district, and it's more data driven than I was previously envisioned. So we consider all the points, the current situation, the growth, the logistics, everything, and then also keeping that small town neighborhood approach, neighborhood walkability in mind. So everything is very well thought on every scenario building. So this is really a very thought out, laid out process, and we're taking our time to make sure that we stick and adhere to our town school district principles and commitment. So we look forward. I'm really looking forward for the final one, but so far so good.
Thanks, Rajesh. Tarek, I think, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I mean, as parent representatives, we were very much, vested in making sure that whatever changes was going to happen based on, the redistricting wouldn't just be convenient for the kids, but also, wouldn't cause too much disruption to the parents. So we actually wanted to make sure we had everyone covered. And I can assure every parent that whatever the ultimate, plan, is going to come out would have really gone through a very robust vetting process from us as, parent representatives in trying to make sure that, we cause as very little disruptions to your lives and, everything associated with providing education to your kids as possible. So just know that we have you covered. And if you have any, questions, just reach out to us, and we'll make sure we channel it to the committee and Priya and Kate. Thanks.
Thank you. Shannon?
Yeah, I would just add, I've been very pleased with how open the whole committee has been to our voices throughout the process. While so much of this has been driven by data, I think we've also, to Tarek's point, taken our own logic as parents into account in this process, and also having discussions around neighborhoods. We all as committee members live in different parts of Shrewsbury and may not be familiar with all parts, but everyone has really stepped in to say, well, there's a walking path here, or, there's this community here. And sort of really understanding the perspectives, I think, that everyone has brought to the table has really given not just a data-driven approach, but, a general logic approach as well, which I think makes me feel more comfortable about the scenarios that we've seen.
Thanks, Shannon. Anyone else from the committee, any of our principals want to make any brief comments before we wrap up?
Well, Joe,
Tiffany?
I just, the parents on this committee, they really do want to hear from parents who are interested in learning more or asking questions. I know that our parent committee members are going to be going to PTOs. If they haven't already come to your PTO, be on the lookout because they will be coming shortly. They do want you to reach out to them to ask questions or gain clarity. And we are also having lots of discussions about ensuring that each of our schools are considering student demographics as we're moving different components around, being sure that each school population really reflects the diversity within our town. That has been a critical point of our discussion.
Sure. And Brian or Christine, anything from that you want to share? Brian?
I think that I've spoken to many parents over the past year on some of their concerns about the process, not the process, but some of the concerns about potentially leaving a school that they love, and parents and students love the schools where they are. But I want to reassure everyone in our community, every parent, that you're well represented by the parents on the committee. And I'm very grateful to have the guiding principles, because those really guide our work, but they also represent, I think, some of the most important factors that families consider as we go through this process. So as Tarek or Rajesh said, you're in good hands. And we've been very thoughtful and very considerate of what we think families and students will want and need at the end of this process. So it's been a great process so far.
Dr. Sawyer, I just want to echo what has been said, that we're each representatives of the schools, and while we're taking a look at all of the factors, we definitely want to hear the community voices. So please feel free to reach out to any of us to let us know what's on your mind and what you might be thinking about or concerned about.
No, thank you. And I certainly concur. It's been a wonderful group to work with, and it's really, everyone's very engaged and everyone wants to do the best job that they can. We had a few more questions come in, so we'll just spend a few more minutes trying to answer them. And then someone had asked, is this going to be recorded? They missed the first part. It is being recorded. We're going to share the link to the recording as well as the slide presentation on the redistricting website. We'll get that loaded up as soon as we can, probably in the next day or two. And then let me just answer, let's see if we can answer a few more questions, and we'll wrap up shortly. So one question was, how or when we'll be filling the Spring Street parent role? And I know Ms. Fritz will likely send a communication through Mr. Maybe to the Spring Street parent community to make sure that it's been a while since we had asked for interest. So to make sure that we get someone representative on board as quickly as we can. So we appreciate that. There was a question that said, wondering if each of the neighborhoods as presented on the map will be assigned to the same school. And I'm wondering, maybe, I don't know, Priya or Patrick can start with that, and we can make sure kind of the understanding again of how neighborhoods might be broken down, because there's going to be lines of demarcation in some place, obviously, and some of those can be obvious. I know I was looking at the map in one of our last meetings, and it was a potential boundary. And it was clearly a place where there was a very natural break between residential neighborhoods. It was really clear cut. Other places it might not be so much. And just speaking to our existing places, there's certainly streets where, one side of the street goes to one school, the other side of the street goes to another school. But the determination was made the last time we did this back in 1997, that was what needed to happen in order to balance out the numbers. But maybe Priya, from your perspective, you could answer that, and then we'll see if other people have some perspective as well.
No, you're right, spot on, Dr. Saad. You can see on the map where those logical boundaries are. The aim of the process is, eventually to balance out the enrollment. So as you can imagine, there's going to be movement. So you are not going to be in the same school that, that neighborhood is in currently. So potentially, you could be, especially if it's close to the school. That's what we're really trying to maintain. If you are walking and really close, we're trying not to move those components around. But as you go out, you'll notice, and as you're along the edges of districts, those are the ones that potentially will get moved. So it is, we've created these components as district neighborhoods, but they will potentially move to another school. That all depends on how the scenarios play out.
Dr. Sawyer, I might just make one inference about the question, maybe, and that is the map that was shown. And yes, we'll share this presentation on our website for folks to look at in more detail later. It's on the Shrewsbury Public Schools Beal School Redistricting website. And as Priya was just mentioning, one of the maps that you saw was a map with two different pieces of information. The first was color coding our existing elementary schools. That's the existing. And then on top of that were the 46 different little puzzle pieces that's referred to as a component. And each one of those components had a label beginning with the existing school district name, like Coolidge 2 or Patton 3. Those are just puzzle pieces, names. Those are not designations for a plan. We didn't present any information about prospective plans tonight. That will come later. But again, kind of inferring what the question is, each of those puzzle pieces is, it's important to maintain the integrity of those puzzle pieces, because those are what we believe geographic natural boundaries and neighborhoods, so to speak. So people that are within a component are very likely to stay together. But because one component's next to another or adjacent to it doesn't necessarily mean they're both going to go to the same school. So I just, that might be a little bit repetitive, but I just wanted to kind of clarify what people saw tonight.
I think that's an important clarification for sure. So hopefully that was helpful. We are going to wrap up here in a moment. There was a question that came in, a couple things. What lessons were learned that were applied to the elementary school building? And I'm sure as we get closer to opening Beal, we'll be talking lots more about the design. And actually at the next school committee meeting, I'm sorry, not the next one, which is tomorrow night, which I invite you to tune into, but on December 16th, I believe, is the next regular public meeting. And there's going to be a presentation actually by the architects, an update on the school building. And we do have a part of our website devoted to the new Beal. And as we get closer to opening it, we'll certainly be sharing all the great design features. It's extremely well done. LPA Associates, who's been the architect of many schools in Shrewsbury, going back to Floral Street School, high school, the renovation of Oak Middle School, the new Sherwood Middle School. They've done a phenomenal job again designing this new school. We're going to be really excited to open it up. And then finally, and this is actually turns into, I think, a good suggestion. It's a question of where to send suggestions for potential walking paths or things like that. And it occurs to me that what we should do is that we will put an email address for the redistricting committee. And we'll get that up and loaded on the website for the project. Again, we'll send out that link again when we send this out. And so if anyone's interested in giving feedback to the redistricting committee, we'll make sure we create an email address for that. And Patrick, is that something that I don't want to overstep here? So you're
no, it's already created. I didn't want to cause any confusion, but it's already created, and it's simply redistricting@shrewsbury.k12.ma.us.
Perfect.
So
and we'll make sure that gets on the website.
Yeah.
And if you send it there, we'll make sure we direct it in the right direction, and we'll make sure everybody on the redistricting committee sees that information and those requests. Again, we really appreciate everyone's interest and participation this evening. So with that, I will wrap up by thanking our committee members, thanking Priya and Kate from AppGeo, and thanking everyone who attended. We are going to do the very best job we can with this. It is a very complex process. Ultimately, we'll end up in a really good place, just as we did back in 1997. I can guarantee you that it will be imperfect, and that there will be people who are ultimately happy with the decisions we make, and there will be some who will be unhappy. Because there are people who are not going to want to change. And to reiterate what Mr. Mabee talked about earlier, one of the things that's great about our school district is that our families love being part of their school communities. And certainly if you're in your children are thriving in a particular school community, it is perfectly natural not to want to have to move them somewhere else. But what I can promise you is while we're not going to be able to keep everybody where they are and accomplish our goals in opening this new school and redistricting, what I can say to you is that we will do our absolute best to make sure, and I know that Chris Girardi, the principal of the new Beal, the principal of the current Beal, who will also be the principal at the new Beal school, will be working very hard to create a wonderful, welcoming school community there. And that our existing schools will do the same for any children who might be redistricted to those schools, because that's a possibility as well. I will close with sharing a brief story. When I was a very young, naive, new assistant principal in Shrewsbury, I remember talking with the new principal who had hired me, Ellen Fairbanks, and saying, boy, these families must be really excited to come to this beautiful, brand new Floral Street school. And she said, well, they are, but a lot of them are really disappointed because they loved the schools they were coming from, Coolidge and Patton and Spring Street at the time. And it was really hard for them to leave those school communities. But I do think that the work we did then, which we're replicating now, was to create as strong a school culture and climate as we could at the new school to make sure our students were able to thrive there. And we're committed to making sure that we do that in this case as well. So again, thanks for attending and viewing. We look forward to your continued participation and interest. And thanks to everyone, and have a great evening.